When reports of neglect and unfair treatment among lower-level employees surfaced, a powerful CEO took an unprecedented step. He secretly joined his own company as a newly hired worker. What he uncovered shattered him. A janitor working tirelessly yet unable to afford a decent life for herself and her children. Executives discarding frontline employees as if they were disposable. A company culture built on hierarchy, not humanity. Now, the CEO has returned, not as an observer, but as a leader determined to rewrite the rules. Miles Bennett sat in his executive office on the top floor of Neovision Corp., a towering skyscraper in the heart of New York City. The skyline stretched endlessly before him, a breathtaking view he had once admired with pride. But today, the site felt empty. In front of him lay a confidential internal report, one that had been gnawing at him for days. It detailed a troubling trend. While the company's upper management and corporate teams thrived, employees in lower-tier roles were struggling. The numbers were stark: high turnover rates, minimal benefits, and widespread dissatisfaction among service staff, janitors, security guards, receptionists, the very people who kept the company running behind the scenes. The report, though filled with cold statistics, painted a clear and troubling picture. Neovision's success had come at the cost of its most invisible employees. Miles had spent years building this company from the ground up, driven by a vision of innovation and corporate excellence. But as he flipped through the report, he realized something deeply unsettling. Had they built something exceptional, or had they simply created another corporate machine that only valued those at the top? He had always prided himself on being a leader who listened, who cared, but the data suggested otherwise. Complaints from lower-level employees were often dismissed or buried beneath layers of bureaucracy. Surveys about workplace satisfaction showed an alarming drop in morale among janitors and front desk workers. The benefits package for corporate employees had been expanded, yet the same could not be said for those in service roles. The worst part: no one in his leadership team seemed to care. He had discussed these concerns in executive meetings, but each time the response was lukewarm at best. The turnover in those positions is natural, one director had told him. They come and go. It's not a career, Miles. It's just a job. Another had casually shrugged. They knew what they signed up for. Our priority should be retaining top talent. Miles had sat in those meetings, feeling a growing sense of frustration as his board members and senior managers dismissed the issue as a minor inconvenience. But was it? Was it truly insignificant that some of his hardest-working employees were struggling to make ends meet, while others sat in glass offices with six-figure salaries and stock options? Something about it didn't sit right with him. He had built Neovision with the belief that everyone in the company mattered. If that was no longer true, he needed to see it for himself. That night, as the city buzzed beneath him, Miles made a decision. He wasn't going to sit in his office and rely on second-hand reports any longer. If he wanted the truth, he had to find it himself. And the only way to truly understand the struggles of his lowest-paid employees was to become one. Over the next few days, he crafted a plan. He would go undercover as a new hire in the company's service division. He had done his research. A branch in New Jersey had an open position for an entry-level office assistant. It was perfect. He had no intention of exposing anyone or playing a game of corporate espionage. He simply wanted to observe, to listen, to walk in the shoes of those his company had overlooked. With the help of his trusted assistant, Cameron, he created a new identity: Mike Carter, a mid-40s man looking for work after being laid off from a previous job. He changed his appearance just enough to be unrecognizable. He trimmed his beard, let his hair grow out slightly, ditched his expensive tailored suits for a simple button-up shirt and slacks from a department store. Instead of polished dress shoes, he wore scuffed sneakers. Instead of stepping out of a luxury sedan, he would take public transportation like many of his employees did. By the time he looked in the mirror on the morning of his first shift, Miles Bennett was gone. In his place stood Mike Carter, an ordinary man searching for a job. As he stepped into the bustling lobby of the New Jersey branch, a strange feeling settled in his chest. He had spent years being the man everyone turned to, the CEO whose presence commanded attention. But today, no one noticed him. He was just another applicant, just another name on a piece of paper. For the first time in decades, he was invisible. And that was exactly what he needed. The moment Miles stepped through the glass doors of Neovision's New Jersey branch, he felt a shift in the air. The same company he had built, the same organization that had carried his vision to success, suddenly felt like foreign territory. The sleek, modern design of the lobby remained the same, but this time he wasn't here as a CEO. No one acknowledged him, no receptionist greeted him by name, no executive stopped to shake his hand. He was just another new hire, indistinguishable from the dozens who had passed through these doors before him. The front desk assistant, a young woman in a navy blazer, barely glanced up when he approached. "Name?" she asked flatly, clicking through her computer screen. "Mike Carter," he replied, keeping his voice even. She nodded, barely listening, then handed him a lanyard with a visitor's badge. "Training starts at 9 a.m. Sharp in room 214. "Don't be late," she said, already moving on to the next task. No introduction, no welcome, no sense that his presence even mattered. He took the elevator to the second floor, where a cluster of other new hires waited outside room 214. Some looked fresh out of high school, others were older, faces lined with exhaustion, the kind that came from years of working thankless jobs. No one spoke. There was no friendly chatter, no warmth, just a quiet resignation, as if they were already bracing for disappointment. At exactly 9 a.m., the door swung open, and a supervisor named Greg Norton stepped in. He was in his mid-50s, stocky, with graying hair and an air of perpetual impatience. He didn't bother with introductions. "Listen up," he barked, scanning the group with disinterest. "You're all here because you need a job. We don't have time to hold your hand, so don't expect a warm welcome. You do what you're told, when you're told. If you have questions, figure it out. If you can't, you won't last long. Got it?" Miles had sat through countless leadership seminars in his career, discussing how to engage employees, how to foster motivation and respect. But here, standing in a room full of people who were already being treated as disposable, he realized none of those ideals existed at this level. There was no motivation, no empowerment, just survival. As the day unfolded, it became clear that training was an afterthought. The group was given a brief, outdated employee handbook, then sent off to different areas without guidance. Some were assigned to maintenance, others to administrative support. Miles was placed at the front desk as a low-level office assistant. The transition was immediate. Greg and the other managers barely looked at him. He was expected to handle everything from answering calls to restocking office supplies, but no one bothered to explain the system, the procedures, or even where basic materials were stored. By noon, he had already made 3 mistakes, not because he was incompetent, but because no one had told him how things worked. When he had asked a fellow employee for help, she had only laughed. "You're on your own, newbie." At one point, a senior executive named Daniel Reeves came storming into the lobby. He was in his late 40s, tall, well-dressed, with the unmistakable arrogance of someone who had never had to struggle for a paycheck. He barely glanced at Miles before slamming a stack of files onto the desk. "These need to go to accounting. Now." Miles hesitated. "Where's accounting?" Reeves's brows furrowed as if he couldn't believe he was being questioned. "Are you serious?" He scoffed. "Jesus. This is why hiring bottom-of-the-barrel workers never works." He turned to the receptionist nearby. "Get someone competent to deal with this. I don't have time for idiots." The words stung, but not because they were directed at him. He had dealt with worse in high-stakes business negotiations. No, what got to him was the realization that this wasn't just how they spoke to him, this was how they spoke to all employees at his level. They weren't seen as people, just hands to do the work no one else wanted to do. As Miles stood there, unsure whether to go left or right, something unexpected happened. A woman appeared at his side, her voice low but firm. "Come on, I'll show you," she said, gesturing for him to follow. She wasn't a receptionist, nor was she an administrator. She was a janitor, wearing the unmistakable blue uniform of the custodial staff. Her name tag read, Rosa Martinez. Miles followed as she led him down a hallway and into the back offices. She moved with quiet confidence, her steps practiced and sure, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. "You'd think they'd train you before throwing you in," she muttered as they walked. "But they never do. New people just have to figure things out on their own." "You've seen this happen a lot?" Miles asked, his curiosity piqued. Rosa let out a soft laugh. "Every week. I've been here for 10 years. and nothing's changed. They cycle through assistants like it's a game. People either quit or get fired because they can't keep up with nonsense rules no one tells them about. She handed him the files. Accounting's through that door. Miles looked at her, truly taking her in for the first time. She was in her early 50s, with graying black hair pulled back into a bun. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but her eyes were sharp, observant. She had seen everything, the good, the bad, and the parts of the company no one in upper management ever acknowledged. "You seem to know how to do everything," he remarked. Rosa shrugged. "When you've been here long enough, you pick things up. No one notices the janitors, but we see everything. Someone's got to keep things running, even if no one says thank you." There was no bitterness in her voice, just acceptance. She had no expectations of gratitude, no illusions that things would change. For the first time since he started this experiment, Miles felt something shift inside him. He had come here to see if Neovision had a problem. Now, standing next to a woman who did 100 different jobs with no recognition, he realized he had found his answer. The problem wasn't just a lack of benefits or bad policies. The problem was deeper. It was cultural. It was systemic. It was the simple fact that the people who worked the hardest were the ones who mattered the least. For the next few days, Miles navigated his new role as an entry-level assistant, moving through the office with a quiet observation that no one seemed to notice. The pattern quickly became clear: lower-tier employees were treated as expendable, invisible, undeserving of even the most basic respect. Managers barked orders at them, rarely acknowledging their efforts. Employees like him, receptionists, custodians, and security staff were expected to function seamlessly. But there was no support, no training, no recognition. They were cogs in a machine, expected to keep turning, expected to absorb the weight of the company's success without ever receiving any of the benefits. Yet, despite the environment, Rosa remained the one person who held everything together. She was everywhere. Miles saw her wiping down conference rooms after executives had finished their meetings, removing coffee cups and discarded notes without a word. He saw her in the break room, refilling supplies that no one else noticed were running low. He saw her in the main lobby, directing lost clients when the receptionists were too busy on personal calls to care. She never stopped. And yet, no one thanked her. One afternoon, as Miles struggled to fix the printer, a task that wasn't remotely his responsibility but had been dumped on him anyway, Rosa appeared again. Without a word, she pressed 3 buttons in quick succession, clearing the jam in seconds. Miles exhaled. "You really do know everything, don't you?" Rosa just shrugged, her hands already wiping ink stains off her uniform. "If I don't fix things, who will?" There was no arrogance in her voice, no resentment, just a simple truth. The office ran because of her, even if no one realized it. That night, as he finished his shift and headed toward the exit, he saw her again. It was past 11 p.m., and the building had mostly emptied, but Rosa was still there, cleaning the cafeteria. The lights were dim, the hum of refrigerators filling the empty space as she moved between tables, stacking chairs, wiping down surfaces. She worked with efficiency and care, as if this were her own home, as if the state of the building actually mattered to her. And then Miles noticed something else. She wasn't just cleaning. She was carefully packing leftover food. At first he thought it was just part of the job, maybe she was putting things away for the next day. But then he saw the plastic containers stacked neatly inside an old grocery bag. She wasn't throwing it away. She was taking it home. Something inside him twisted. He watched as she folded the bag carefully, securing it with a knot before slipping it into her tote. Then she grabbed her coat and headed for the exit. Miles didn't hesitate. He followed her. She walked 2 blocks to the bus stop, standing under the flickering yellow light of a street lamp. The neighborhood around them wasn't the worst, but it was clear that this wasn't where most corporate employees lived. He kept his distance, watching as the bus arrived and Rosa stepped inside, disappearing into the city. The next day, he did something he hadn't planned. He looked her up. Neovision's employee database was extensive, but for someone at Rosa's level, the information was bare bones. No detailed employment history, no records of salary increases or performance reviews. Just a hire date from over a decade ago and a single emergency contact number. But that wasn't what shocked him. Her salary. After 10 years of work, she made less than what some executives spent on a single dinner. It wasn't enough. Not even close. Miles sat back in his chair, staring at the screen, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Guilt. He had built this company. He had signed off on budgets, on salary structures, on benefit plans. And yet, he had never once thought about the people at the bottom. That night he followed Rosa again, this time all the way home. She lived in a tiny apartment complex, the kind with cracked sidewalks and flickering hallway lights. He watched from across the street as she unlocked the door and stepped inside. Through the window he saw 2 boys, her children. They rushed to her the moment she walked in. She pulled the grocery bag from her tote, unpacking the food onto the table, dividing it between the 2 plates. There was no third plate. She wasn't eating. She was giving everything to her kids. Miles turned away, his stomach heavy with something he couldn't quite name. This wasn't a broken system. This was his system. And he was going to fix it. Miles barely slept that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts that refused to settle. He had spent years building Neovision, priding himself on its success, but now, for the first time, he saw the cracks beneath the surface, the people who had been forgotten, the ones who worked the hardest yet had the least. The image of Rosa packing up those leftovers, the way she carefully rationed them for her children, gnawed at him like a sickness. It wasn't just unfair, it was unforgivable. And the worst part, he had allowed it to happen. By the time morning arrived, he had made his decision. This had to end. As he walked into the office that day, something inside him had shifted. He still wore the same uniform, still answered phones at the front desk, still blended into the background. But now he wasn't just observing. He was planning. Throughout the day, he continued watching Rosa, paying close attention to how she navigated the office. She wasn't just a janitor, she was the quiet backbone of the entire operation. When deliveries arrived at the wrong entrance, she was the one who redirected them. When the break room ran out of coffee, she was the one who refilled it. When new employees had no idea where to go, she pointed them in the right direction, even though it was never her job to do so. No one thanked her. No one even noticed. Except for Miles. That afternoon, as he walked through the halls, he overheard a conversation in the executive lounge. Daniel Reeves, the same senior executive who had dismissed him days ago, was laughing with 2 other managers, leaning back against a marble countertop as he stirred cream into his coffee. "I swear, if I have to hear another complaint about pay raises for the janitorial staff, I'm going to lose my mind," Reeves scoffed. "They clean floors. That's it. What exactly are they expecting?" One of the other managers chuckled. "They should be grateful we even give them a paycheck. It's not like they're doing brain surgery." Miles clenched his fists. It was so effortless for them to dehumanize the very people who kept their environment clean, who ensured the offices were functional, who did the work they wouldn't dream of touching themselves. Reeves took a sip of his coffee. Let's be real, if they want more money, they should have worked harder and gotten a real job. Something inside Miles snapped. He had heard enough. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay in control. Now wasn't the time to reveal himself. Not yet. Instead, he turned away, walked back toward the front desk, and picked up his phone. It was time to make some calls. That evening, after his shift ended, he met with his executive assistant, Cameron, in secret. "Clear my schedule for tomorrow," he said, his voice firm, "and send a company-wide meeting invite to the entire corporate office. Executives, managers, department heads, everyone." Cameron raised an eyebrow. "What should I list as the reason?" Miles met his gaze, the weight of his decision settling in his chest. "Change," he said simply. "Tell them we're about to make some changes." The next morning, he walked into Neovision not as Mike Carter, the overlooked assistant, but as Miles Bennett, the CEO. And this time, everyone noticed. The moment Miles Bennett stepped through the doors of Neovision's New Jersey branch, the atmosphere in the building shifted. Gone was the quiet, unassuming man in scuffed sneakers and a cheap button-up. In his place stood the CEO. His suit was sharp, his posture straight, his presence commanding. It had been only a week since he had walked through these same doors as Mike Carter, unnoticed and unimportant. But now, as he strode across the lobby, every eye turned to him. The executives, who had barely glanced at him before, now scrambled to offer greetings. "Mr. Bennett, we weren't expecting you today." The receptionist, who had been indifferent during his first day, sat up straighter, her voice suddenly polished and professional. Employees murmured to each other as he passed, their expressions filled with confusion. By the time he reached the conference room where the emergency company-wide meeting was set to take place, the tension in the air was palpable. Senior managers and executives had already gathered, seated around the massive glass table, their voices hushed as they speculated about the reason for the sudden summons. Daniel Reeves was among them, sipping coffee as if this were just another routine discussion. When Miles entered, the room fell silent. Cameron, his assistant, was already waiting, nodding subtly as Miles took his seat at the head of the table. He let the silence stretch for a few moments, watching as the unease settled in. Then he spoke. "Over the past week I've been working in this office," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Not as your CEO, not as an executive, but as a frontline employee, and I saw things that should never happen in this company." There was a ripple of movement. Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Daniel Reeves frowned. Miles leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. "I saw new hires being thrown into jobs without training. I saw employees struggling to navigate their roles because no one bothered to guide them. I saw managers belittle their teams, treating them as if they were disposable. But worst of all, I saw some of the hardest working people in this company being ignored, overlooked, and treated as if they don't matter." He paused, scanning the room. No one spoke. No one dared. "Tell me something," he continued, his gaze locking onto Reeves. "What do you think would happen if the executives in this room disappeared for a week?" Reeves scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "The company would struggle, obviously." Miles nodded slowly. "And what do you think would happen if the janitors, the security staff, the receptionists, or the cafeteria workers disappeared for a week?" Silence. "That's the problem," Miles said, his voice cutting through the air like steel. "This company has spent years prioritizing executives while ignoring the people who actually keep the doors open. The people who clean our offices, who keep our systems running, who greet our clients. The people who work late, who take on extra tasks without complaint, who pick up the slack when others fail to do their jobs. They are the foundation of this company, and yet they are treated like an afterthought." Several managers exchanged uneasy glances. Reeves looked unimpressed. "With all due respect, sir," Reeves said, "these are entry-level jobs. They come and go. We can't be expected to prioritize temporary employees over senior staff." Miles's jaw tightened. "Tell that to Rosa Martinez," he said. Reeves blinked. "Who?" Miles exhaled slowly, fighting the urge to slam his fist on the table. "That's exactly my point," he said, his voice steady but edged with something dangerous. "Rosa has worked here for 10 years. She's not temporary. She's the person who fixes things no one else notices. She keeps this place running. And do you know how she's been repaid for her loyalty?" He reached into a folder Cameron had placed in front of him and slid a document across the table. Reeves frowned as he scanned it. Other managers leaned in. Their expressions slowly shifted from confusion to discomfort. It was Rosa's salary. Her 10-year salary history. A paycheck that had barely increased in a decade. "She makes less than half of what some of you spend on a client dinner," Miles said, his voice cold. "She works 2 shifts, stays late without overtime, picks up responsibilities that aren't hers. And yet she takes home so little that she has to pack up leftover food from the cafeteria just to feed her kids." Several executives looked away, ashamed. Others just sat in stunned silence. "I've built this company," Miles continued, his voice now filled with a quiet intensity. "And I refuse to stand by while the people who work the hardest live the hardest lives." He leaned back, letting his words settle. Then he laid out the plan. "Effective immediately," he announced, "we're overhauling our employee policies." He turned to Cameron, who handed out documents outlining the changes. First, a salary increase for all frontline employees, No one who works full-time in this company should struggle to pay rent or put food on the table. Second, a benefits package for all employees, regardless of position. That includes paid sick leave, proper healthcare options, and meal stipends. Third, mandatory training for all new hires, no more throwing employees into jobs without preparation. And lastly, performance-based promotions will be available at every level, not just for corporate positions. That means people like Rosa, people who actually keep this company moving, will have opportunities to advance. The room erupted into whispers. Some executives nodded, approving. Others, including Reeves, looked irritated. Miles wasn't finished. "And one more thing," he said, his tone unwavering. "Every executive, every senior manager in this company, myself included, will be required to spend 1 week per year working in frontline positions. Cleaning, reception, security. I want you all to see what it takes to do these jobs before you dare dismiss them again." Now, the room was silent. Miles scanned their faces. "If any of you have an issue with these changes," he said, "you know where the door is." No one moved. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the air conditioning hum, the weight of realization settling over the table. Then, slowly, a single clap. Miles turned toward the source. It was Angela, a mid-level HR director. Then another. And another. Until the entire back half of the room, the managers, the department heads, the lower-level employees who had always wanted these changes but had never been heard, began to applaud. It was slow at first, hesitant. Then it grew, swelling into something stronger, something undeniable. Miles didn't smile. This wasn't a victory. It was a reckoning. Reeves didn't clap. Neither did a few of the senior executives. They wouldn't last long. Miles stood, gathering his documents. "Meeting adjourned," he said. Then, without another word, he walked out. The aftermath of the meeting rippled through Neovision like a shockwave. By the next morning, every employee in the company knew what had happened. The news spread quickly how the CEO had gone undercover, how he had exposed the mistreatment of lower-level staff, how he had confronted the senior executives who had dismissed their struggles for years. The whispers in the hallways turned into full-fledged conversations. Employees who had spent years feeling invisible now spoke in hushed yet excited tones, daring to hope that, for the first time, things might actually change. Miles, however, knew that change didn't happen overnight. It wasn't enough to make an announcement, to issue a directive, to demand policy revisions. Words were easy. Action was harder. He had seen enough corporate leaders make empty promises, tossing out token gestures of goodwill before returning to business as usual. He refused to be one of them. And so, over the next several weeks, he made sure his words became reality. The first step was ensuring Rosa Martinez received the recognition she deserved. One morning, before the workday officially began, Miles arrived early, stepping into the same cafeteria where he had first seen her carefully packing up leftover food. It was quieter at this hour, the scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filling the space. Rosa was there, as always, already working. She stood by the coffee machine, meticulously cleaning the counter, unaware of his presence at first. When she finally turned and saw him standing there, she froze. For the first time, Miles saw uncertainty in her eyes. She had likely heard the rumors about the CEO's sudden revelation, about how he had been one of them all along, but she hadn't expected him to seek her out. "Mr. Bennett," she said, straightening her posture as if expecting some kind of reprimand. Miles shook his head. "Miles," he corrected. "I think we've known each other long enough for that." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Okay, Miles." He stepped closer, his tone soft but firm. "I need you to know something. Everything I said in that meeting, it wasn't just for show. I meant it, and it starts with you." She frowned slightly, unsure of what he meant. "You've been here for 10 years, Miles continued. You've done far more than your job title suggests. And yet, no one's ever acknowledged that. No promotions, no raises, no benefits that reflect your contributions. That changes today." He handed her a crisp, official letter. She hesitated before taking it, unfolding the page. As her eyes scanned the words, her breath caught. It was an official promotion. Effective immediately, she was no longer just a janitor, she was the new facilities coordinator, overseeing the entire building's operations. A substantial pay raise. Full benefits. A bonus to make up for the years she had been overlooked. Rosa looked up at him, her hands trembling slightly. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Miles said gently. "Just know that this is overdue, and not just for you." Her lips parted as if she wanted to argue, to insist that she hadn't done anything special, that she had only done what needed to be done. But for once, she let herself accept it. She let herself be seen. The next step was ensuring the rest of the changes were enforced company-wide. New policies rolled out swiftly. All frontline employees received wage increases, with salaries adjusted to reflect fair compensation for their roles. Benefits packages were expanded: healthcare, paid sick leave, educational assistance for their children. Promotion pathways were restructured to ensure that dedicated employees weren't trapped in the same positions for decades. But perhaps the most controversial change was the one-week mandatory frontline work initiative. Each year, every senior executive, including Miles himself, would be required to work alongside lower-level employees. It wasn't optional. No more sitting in glass offices, disconnected from reality. If they wanted to lead, they needed to understand the people they were leading. The backlash from certain executives was immediate. Daniel Reeves, predictably, was the loudest voice of opposition. He stormed into Miles's office the morning the initiative was announced, face red with barely contained frustration. "This is ridiculous," he spat. "We're C-suite executives, not interns. You expect us to waste an entire week doing menial labor?" Miles didn't bother looking up from his desk. "If it's so menial, it shouldn't be that difficult for you, should it?" Reeves scoffed. "You're punishing us. This is nothing more than a PR stunt." Miles leaned back in his chair, finally meeting his gaze. "If you see this as punishment, then maybe you've been in your office for too long." He tilted his head slightly. "If you really think the work is beneath you, I'm going to have to question whether you should be in leadership at all." Reeves stiffened. There it was, the unspoken truth between them. He wasn't indispensable. No one was. Miles waited, watching the realization settle in. "I'll make this easy for you," he said finally. "You either get on board or you leave. But if you stay, understand this: you will earn your place here, just like everyone else." Reeves's jaw tightened. He had spent years untouchable, shielded by his title, his connections, his status. But now, none of that mattered. Without another word, he turned and walked out. He was gone within the week. And just like that, Neovision's culture began to shift. Over the next several months, employees who had once felt invisible started speaking up. With every paycheck that reflected a livable wage, with every executive who rolled up their sleeves and did the work they once ignored, with every recognition of the labor that had gone unnoticed for too long, trust was rebuilt. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, still moments of resistance, still those who clung to the old ways. But progress was happening. One evening, months after everything had begun, Miles stood in his office, looking out over the city skyline. He had stood here so many times before, watching the same view, but tonight it felt different. The weight of failure no longer clung to him. The company he had built was finally becoming the company he had always envisioned. His gaze drifted to the framed photograph on his desk, a new edition. It wasn't a corporate award. It wasn't a newspaper article praising Neovision's leadership. It was a photo of Rosa, standing in her new office, smiling as she adjusted her nameplate. Miles exhaled, a slow, steady breath. For the first time in a long time, he felt peace. Because this time he hadn't just built a company. He had built something that truly mattered. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.